My name is Charlotte, and I never imagined my life would take such a dramatic turn. I grew up in what I always considered a normal family. Well, normal for us at least. My father was a hard-working man, always busy running his window frame business, while my mother dedicated herself to taking care of our home. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My dad rarely spoke about work at home. He would come in late, plant a quick kiss on my mom's cheek, and ask me how school was before settling in for the evening. That was the extent of our discussions about his business. I never minded, though. I was happy in my own little world, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I remember the exact day everything changed. I was 22, fresh out of college, and struggling to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. One afternoon, while passing by my father's home office, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was tense, filled with an anger I had rarely heard before. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you take over my company. I've worked too hard for this." My heart pounded. I knew I shouldn't be eavesdropping, but I couldn't help myself. My stomach twisted into knots as the realization hit me. My father's business was in trouble. But why hadn't he said anything? Why had he kept this from us? That night at dinner, I studied him closely, searching for any signs of distress. He seemed normal, laughing and joking with my mother about her slightly overcooked pot roast, but I noticed the subtle signs. The faint worry lines on his forehead, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. He was keeping a secret, and I needed to find out what it was. I knew I had to do something. The problem was, I had absolutely no experience in business. I didn't even know where to start, but I refused to sit back and watch my father's life's work crumble. The next morning, I started digging for answers. It didn't take long to uncover the name of the man trying to take over my dad's company, Robert Caldwell. A powerful and influential businessman. His office wasn't far from our house. Determined, I marched into the lobby of his corporate building, my heart hammering against my ribs. The receptionist glanced at me with a mixture of confusion and amusement when I boldly asked to see Mr. Caldwell. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "No, but it's important. Please, just 5 minutes," I pleaded. Something in my desperation must have struck a chord, because after a brief phone call, she waved me toward the elevator. "Top floor," she said, eyeing me as if I had lost my mind. The ride up felt like an eternity. When the doors finally slid open, I found myself face to face with Robert Caldwell himself. He was older than I had expected, with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "Well, well," he mused, his gaze sweeping over me. "What do we have here?" I swallowed hard, forcing my nerves down. "Mr. Caldwell, my name is Charlotte Thompson. I'm here about my father's company." "Thompson Windows." His eyebrows lifted slightly, an amused smirk playing at his lips. "Thompson's daughter? This is unexpected. Come in, let's talk." I followed him into his massive office, struggling not to gawk at the breathtaking city view behind him. He settled behind his sleek, polished desk and gestured for me to sit. "So, Miss Thompson," he said smoothly, "what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Please, don't take over my father's company. It means everything to him. There must be another way." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes scanning me with intrigue. Then, after a long pause, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Interesting," he murmured. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Thompson. I will leave your father's company alone if you agree to marry my son." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, his voice calm and unwavering. "Marry my son. Help him mature, turn him into a responsible man. Do that, and your father's company is safe." I left Caldwell's office in a daze, my mind spinning. Marry his son? Was he insane? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't have much of a choice. It was either this or watch my father's business collapse. The next day, I found myself back in that same intimidating office. Caldwell was already waiting for me, a smug smile on his face. "So, Miss Thompson," he said, leaning forward, "have you made your decision?" I took a deep breath, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll marry your son." Caldwell clapped his hands together, looking triumphant. Excellent. Let me introduce you then, shall we? Before I could second-guess my decision, I was ushered into another room. And there he was, Caldwell's son. I had expected some uptight businessman, but the man who stood to greet me was anything but. He was tall, with messy dark hair, and a crooked, almost mischievous smile. "Hey," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Jack. You must be Charlotte." I shook his hand, trying not to let my surprise show. "Yeah? That's me." Behind us, his father cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." As soon as the door shut, Jack let out a long sigh and ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry about this. My dad, he has some pretty old-fashioned ideas." I shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant. "It's fine. We're both adults, right? We can handle this." Jack let out a short, dry laugh. "Yeah, sure, just a casual arranged marriage, no big deal." Despite the situation, I found myself intrigued by him. He was surprisingly witty and charming, even if he did seem a little irresponsible. I could see why his father wanted him to grow up. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I started spending time together, if you could call it dating. But as we got to know each other, I realized maybe this arrangement wasn't as impossible as it seemed. Dinners, movies, the usual stuff, but there was always this unshakable undercurrent of awkwardness between us. No matter how much we pretended, we both knew the truth. This wasn't real. And so, 6 months after that fateful meeting in Caldwell's office, I found myself walking down the aisle. My father beamed with pride, his face glowing with happiness. He had no idea about the deal I had made to save his company. As I recited my vows, I looked into Jack's eyes. There was no love there, not really. But there was something else. Friendship. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The reception was a blur of congratulations, champagne, and forced smiles. At one point, Jack's mother, Elizabeth, cornered me. Her smile was tight, her voice laced with insincerity. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her tone deceptively sweet. "I do hope you'll make Jack happy." I forced my best fake smile. "I'll certainly try, Mrs. Caldwell." As we left for our honeymoon, I caught a glimpse of my father-in-law. He was practically glowing with satisfaction, clearly pleased with himself. A surge of anger bubbled inside me. To him, this was all just a game, a perfectly orchestrated transaction. The first few years of our marriage were interesting, to say the least. Jack and I settled into a routine. We lived in a beautiful house, courtesy of his father's wealth, but it felt more like we were distant roommates rather than husband and wife. I did my best to be a positive influence on Jack, encouraging him to take things more seriously. And slowly but surely, I saw a change in him. He started spending less time with his party-loving friends and more time at the office, working alongside his father. For the first time, I saw something in Robert Caldwell's eyes when he looked at Jack. Pride. And that, at least, made me feel like this arrangement wasn't entirely for nothing. Jack's mother, however, was a different story. She never directly said anything, but her disapproval was impossible to ignore. It was in the way her lips pursed whenever I spoke, in the thinly veiled insults disguised as compliments. "Oh, Charlotte, that dress is interesting. So brave of you to wear something like that." I gritted my teeth and forced another polite smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Despite the challenges, I held on to hope. Maybe, with time, Jack and I could grow to love each other. Maybe, when we had children, everything would change. But life had other plans. It was a crisp fall day when everything came crashing down. Jack and I sat in the doctor's office, the silence between us thick with unspoken fears. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently, "but the tests show that you, Mr. Caldwell, are unable to father children." The words hit me like a physical blow. No children. The one thing I had been counting on, the one thing I thought could bring us closer, make this marriage real, was now impossible. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts drifted to my parents. My father's business had flourished since my marriage to Jack. He had even managed to double his turnover. I was genuinely happy for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lost. I wanted to work, to have a purpose beyond simply being Jack's wife. When I brought it up to him, his response was immediate and dismissive. Work? Why would you need to work? We have more than enough money. It's not about the money, Jack. I want to do something meaningful. He shook his head as if the idea was absurd. In our circle, wives don't work. They do charity. Why don't you start a foundation or something? And so, the Charlotte Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer was born. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but it gave me purpose. I threw myself into the work, organizing fundraisers, visiting hospitals, doing whatever I could to help. Jack, however, seemed indifferent. He barely acknowledged my new passion. In fact, he barely acknowledged me at all. We were living parallel lives, occupying the same space but rarely intersecting. Years passed, 10 to be exact. And then, once again, everything changed. Jack's father died suddenly of a heart attack. Just like that, Jack was thrust into the role of CEO. I tried to be supportive, but I could see him struggling under the weight of his new responsibility. 2 years later, we were hit with more bad news. She has cancer, the doctor told us, Jack's mother. Jack barely reacted. We should move her to a care facility, he said, his voice detached. They can take better care of her there. But Elizabeth was defiant. I will die in my own home, she declared, her chin lifted with determination. And so, drawing on my years of experience with the foundation, I took charge of her care. I hired nurses, coordinated treatments, and spent hours by her bedside. To my surprise, something unexpected happened. Elizabeth's attitude toward me began to soften. One day, as I adjusted her pillows, she reached for my hand, her frail fingers curling around mine. You're a good Charlotte, she said softly, her voice almost trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't see it sooner. I felt tears prick at my eyes, a mix of sorrow and relief washing over me. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. 5 years had passed since Jack took over his father's company. I wish I could say things had improved, but the truth was far from it. Jack's behavior had become increasingly erratic. He was drinking more, staying out until odd hours, and snapping at me over the smallest things. It was as if the pressure of his new role had crushed whatever resolve he had left. Then, one day, I received a call that sent chills down my spine. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you, Jack's assistant said hesitantly, but Mr. Caldwell hasn't been to the office in days. Is everything all right? I felt a lump form in my throat. I had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach twist with anxiety. That night, when Jack finally stumbled through the door, reeking of alcohol, I could no longer hold my silence. Jack, what's happening? I demanded, my voice laced with concern. Your assistant called. You haven't been to work. He laughed bitterly, slumping onto the couch. Work? What's the point? The company's going under anyway. Dear old Dad left me a sinking ship, and I couldn't keep it afloat. I stared at him in disbelief. All those years of his father's hard work, gone. And Jack seemed almost relieved? Desperate to salvage something, anything, I reached out to my father. Despite being semi-retired, he agreed to help, offering Jack a position as his deputy in hopes of mentoring him back to success. But Jack's heart wasn't in it. He showed up late, left early, and did the bare minimum. I watched helplessly as my father's sales figures began to drop, the weight of Jack's incompetence dragging everything down. I knew I had to confront him. One night, after he'd had a few drinks, as usual, I decided to speak my mind. Jack, we need to talk about work, I said firmly. You're barely showing up. My father's company is suffering because of you. Jack's face twisted with anger. Oh, so now it's my fault? He sneered. I never wanted this, Jules, any of it. I frowned, my stomach churning. What are you talking about? He let out a harsh, ugly laugh. This life, this marriage. I'm just waiting for Mom to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and get out of here. I gasped, staring at him in horror. How can you say that? Your mother is dying, and all you care about is her money? "Don't act all high and mighty," he spat. "We both know this marriage is a sham. You're just as eager to get out as I am." Disgusted, I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I froze. Standing there, her face pale and filled with sorrow, was Jack's mother. The weight of what she had just overheard settled heavily in the room. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, silently, she reached out and squeezed my hand. In that single gesture, I felt her gratitude, her understanding, and her pain. Then, everything changed again. The day I got the call about my parents' plane crash, my world shattered. Mom and Dad gone. Their small plane, meant to take them on a second honeymoon to Hawaii, had instead become their final journey. I needed support, someone to lean on, but Jack, my own husband, was nowhere to be found. He couldn't even be bothered to show up to the funeral. As I stood there, watching my parents' caskets being lowered into the ground, I had never felt more alone. After the funeral, my sorrow morphed into something else. Anger. How dare he? How could he abandon me in my darkest moment? Fueled by that rage, I marched into my father's company. Our company now, I supposed. But what greeted me inside my father's old office made my blood run cold. Jack was there, lounging in my father's chair like he owned the place, barking orders as if he were some kind of conquering hero. "Jack," I said, my voice tight with barely contained fury. "We need to talk." He looked up lazily, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "What is it now, Jules? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Busy?" I spat. "You couldn't even be busy enough to come to my parents' funeral." Jack rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go with the moralizing again. You know what, Jules? You're always nagging, always pushing. Well, I'm done with it. And I'm done with you." I stared at him, stunned into silence. But then, something shifted in his expression. The anger faded, replaced by something colder, something calculating. A slow, smug smile curled on his lips. "You know, Jules," he said, his tone eerily calm, "this company, it's worth about $17 million. And guess what? As deputy director, it's all mine now." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back in the chair, Dad's chair, completely at ease. "I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm in charge now, and there's nothing you can do about it." "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "You've already run your father's company into the ground. I won't let you do the same to my father's legacy." Jack chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "Oh, I'm not going to run it, Jules. I'm going to sell it, piece by piece, and then I'm going to live like a king." Before I could stop him, he turned to the computer. My breath caught in my throat as I watched in horror. He was transferring a large sum from the company's account to his personal one. When he was done, he leaned back with a satisfied smirk. "There," he said. "That should keep me comfortable for a while." Then, as if this entire moment was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed them onto the desk in front of me. "Oh, and here, divorce papers. I think it's time we ended this farce, don't you?" I caught the papers reflexively, my hands trembling. My mind raced. How had it come to this? Reeling, I struggled to comprehend the chaos unfolding around me. It was too much, too fast. My parents were gone, my marriage was over, and my father's company was being stolen right before my eyes. I left Jack's office in a daze, the divorce papers clutched tightly in my trembling hands. But as I walked through the city streets, something inside me shifted. I had spent years bending to Jack's will, living under the shadow of his father's manipulations. No more. It was time to fight back. With renewed determination, I headed straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Henderson had been Dad's trusted friend and confidant for years. If anyone could help me, it was him. "Charlotte," Mr. Henderson said as he rose to greet me. His expression was filled with genuine sorrow. "I am so sorry about your parents. How are you holding up?" I collapsed into the chair across from him, the events of the day spilling out in a rush. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his face growing grimmer by the minute. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Charlotte, I think it's time I shared something with you. Your father's will. He made some changes just before the accident. My heart pounded as he pulled out the documents. As he read through them, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The company, it was mine. All mine. Dad had left it to me, not Jack. But there was more. Mr. Henderson looked up from the papers, his eyes twinkling with something close to satisfaction. There's something else you should know. Your father dismissed Jack 2 weeks before his passing. Fired him outright. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. So all those orders Jack was giving, completely meaningless? I asked, still breathless from the revelation. Mr. Henderson nodded. Completely. Then he pulled out an envelope. There's one more thing. A letter from your father. With shaking hands, I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving you like this, but I hope I've given you the tools to build the life you deserve. The company is yours now. And Jules, it's time to let go of Jack. You've given enough of yourself to that marriage. It's time to live for you. I love you, sweetheart. Make me proud. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, wiping my eyes. Do you have a pen? Without hesitation, he handed me one. I signed the divorce papers Jack had given me, feeling lighter with each stroke of the pen. Can you file these? I asked, handing them back. I want this done as quickly as possible. Mr. Henderson nodded. Consider it done. As I left his office, I felt free for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. No more Jack. No more Caldwells pulling my strings. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, my best friend from the charity foundation. Sarah, it's Charlotte. Want to meet for coffee? I have some news. An hour later, we were seated in our favorite cafe, lattes in hand. So? Sarah said, eyeing me curiously. What's this big news? I took a deep breath, then let it all out. Jack, the company, the divorce. Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening with every revelation. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Girl, you're free, and now you're the boss. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. I don't know, Sarah. Can I really run a company? She fixed me with a stern look. Are you kidding me, Charlotte? You've been running that charity foundation like a pro for years. You're smart, you're organized, and you actually care about people. You're going to be an amazing CEO. After our talk, I felt invigorated. It was time to face the music and get my things from Jack's house. I never really thought of it as my home, and now I knew why. When I arrived, I found my mother-in-law, Elizabeth, in the living room. She looked frail, tired from her ongoing battle with cancer. Elizabeth, I said gently, I'm here to get my things. Jack and we're getting divorced. To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. Charlotte, she whispered, I know I haven't always been kind to you, but you've been so good to me. Would you? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Would you consider taking me with you? I was stunned. You want to come with me? Before she could answer, the front door slammed open. Jack stormed in, his face red with fury. You, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. What the hell did you do? The company accounts are blocked. I can't access the money. I straightened my spine, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. That money isn't yours, Jack. It never was. Oh, and by the way, my father fired you 2 weeks ago. You have no claim to the company. I've already instructed security not to let you into the building. Jack's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then, his gaze shifted, finally noticing his mother packing a suitcase. Mom? He sputtered. What are you doing? Elizabeth looked at her son with a mixture of sadness and resolve. I'm going with Charlotte. I'm sorry, Jack, but you've proven to be unreliable. Jack's face turned an even deeper shade of red. Unreliable? Me? This is all your fault, he snapped, his voice dripping with bitterness. You raised me to be this way, with your coddling, your expectations. He turned back to me, his eyes blazing with fury. Dripping with venom, Jack sneered, "Fine, get out both of you. I don't need either of you." I felt a fleeting wave of pity for him. This angry, bitter man was a far cry from the charming, if irresponsible guy I had once married. But I couldn't let that sway me. Not anymore. "Come on, Elizabeth," I said softly. "Let's get your things." As we packed, Jack continued to rant and rave, hurling insults and blame in every direction. But we tuned him out, focusing on the task at hand. He was no longer our concern. The drive to my parents' house was quiet. Elizabeth dozed in the passenger seat, the weight of the day's events finally taking its toll. As we pulled into the driveway, a lump formed in my throat. It felt strange coming here without Mom and Dad. "We're here," I said softly, gently waking Elizabeth. I helped her inside, leading her to my parents' bedroom. It felt right somehow to give her this space. "Are you sure?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes wide as she took in the familiar, yet foreign, surroundings. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "Yes, I think they would have wanted it this way." As I helped Elizabeth settle in, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Grief for my parents, relief at finally being free from Jack, uncertainty about the future. But underneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. Taking over Dad's company felt like diving into the deep end of a pool without knowing how to swim. The first few months were a whirlwind of meetings, financial reports, and sleepless nights. But I was determined to make it work. I hired Tom, a brilliant business consultant, as my right-hand man. He patiently guided me through the intricacies of running a multi-million-dollar company. "You've got good instincts, Charlotte," he would say. "Trust them." Slowly but surely, I found my footing. 6 months in, I wasn't just treading water, I was swimming laps. The company's performance began to improve, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of pride. Dad would have been pleased. Through it all, I never neglected the Cancer Foundation. If anything, my work there became even more important to me. It was a link to my past, and a beacon for my future. Elizabeth's condition worsened over time, and I threw myself into her care, determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. We grew close during those 2 years, healing old wounds and forming a bond I never thought possible. The day she passed, I held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Elizabeth." She squeezed my hand weakly, a small smile on her face before slipping away peacefully. I organized the funeral myself, making sure every detail was perfect. Jack didn't show up. I wasn't surprised, but it still stunned me to see just how far he had fallen. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Henderson. "Charlotte, there's something you need to see. Can you come to my office?" When I arrived, I was shocked to see Jack already there, a young blonde draped over his arm. He smirked at me. "Well, if it isn't the little CEO," he drawled. "Don't worry, I'm just here to collect my inheritance. Mom and I might have had our differences, but blood is thicker than water, right?" I bit my tongue, waiting for Mr. Henderson to speak. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Elizabeth's will. As he spoke, I watched Jack's smug expression morph into disbelief, then fury. "And so I leave my house and all my savings to Charlotte Thompson, with the stipulation that the money be donated to the Cancer Foundation she so passionately supports." Tears sprang to my eyes. Elizabeth's final act of kindness overwhelmed me. Jack exploded. "This is bullshit. She manipulated Mom. She's a fraud, a gold digger. She ruined my life, and now she's stealing my inheritance." His girlfriend, looking bewildered, stepped away from him. "You said we'd be set for life with this money," she hissed. "I'm out of here." She stormed out, leaving Jack sputtering. As I turned to leave, I heard Jack's continued ranting fade behind me. But I didn't care. I felt light. I felt free. Elizabeth's gift wasn't just about the money. It was validation. She had seen me, truly seen me, and she had found me worthy. If there is one thing I have learned from everything I've been through, it's that life can change in an instant. I never thought I would find myself trapped in a loveless marriage, nor did I ever imagine losing my parents so suddenly. But through pain, betrayal, and loss, I discovered something invaluable: strength. For years, I lived in the shadow of others, bending to their will, putting their needs before my own. I allowed myself to believe that sacrifice was love, that silence was peace, and that endurance was strength. But I was wrong. True strength is not in suffering quietly. It is in standing up, in reclaiming what is yours, and in choosing yourself when no one else does. I share my story not because I want sympathy, but because I want you to see that no matter how dark things get, there is always a way forward. No one should feel trapped in a life that no longer serves them. If you are in a situation where you feel powerless, remember this: you are never as powerless as you think. There is always a choice. I learned that sometimes losing everything is what it takes to gain yourself. I walked away from a marriage built on lies. I fought for my father's legacy, and I found my own purpose. The path wasn't easy, but it was mine. And now, I stand here not as a victim of my past, but as the author of my future. To anyone out there who feels lost, who feels like they have given too much and received too little, know this: you are enough. You are worthy, and you have the power to change your story. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but step by step, decision by decision, you can take back control of your life. And when you do, when you finally break free from the chains that have held you back, you will realize something incredible. You were always strong enough. You just needed to see it for yourself.